Silence.
Judge insults royal
Your
guard in court
actions
minutes
today
later. He gets him
have brought
arrested.
shame
The
upon your
courtroom was
regiment
unusually
and
quiet
this
that
court.
morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, casting long beams on the polished wooden floors. The room, usually bustling with chatter and whispers, now held a tense, almost electric silence. People had gathered for an important trial, one that had drawn attention from both the public and the royal family. Every seat was taken, and every eye was fixed on the judge's bench, where Judge Harrison sat, his expression stern and unreadable. He had a reputation for being sharp, both in intellect and tongue, and his decisions were respected, sometimes feared by everyone in the city. Among the attendees stood a figure who seemed almost out of place in the midst of the legal proceedings. Dressed in the ceremonial uniform of the Royal Guard, the man was tall and imposing, his posture perfect, as if he were carved from stone. His eyes, however, revealed a careful attentiveness, a quiet alertness that spoke of years of training and loyalty. The Royal Guard's duty in the courtroom was simple but significant: to ensure the safety and dignity of the royal family, who often attended trials of high importance. His presence was a reminder to everyone that the court's decisions carried weight far beyond the walls of justice. They could affect the crown itself. The case on that day was unusual. It involved a dispute over a minor but delicate issue concerning a noble estate. While it might have seemed trivial to some, the case had grown in complexity because of its potential implications for royal influence over local matters. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Lawyers whispered to each other, reporters fidgeted in their seats with notebooks poised, and spectators leaned forward, eager for every detail. Everyone wanted to see how Judge Harrison would handle the case, as his rulings often became lessons in law, decorum, and sometimes unexpected drama. As the session began, the Royal Guard stood near the judge's bench, his expression neutral but attentive. He followed every word carefully, not because he had any direct role in the trial, but because he understood that every action in that room could ripple outward into matters of royal protocol. Judge Harrison had a habit of observing everyone in the room, weighing their demeanor, their gestures, even the tiniest reactions. He could tell a lie without a single word being spoken, and he could sense when someone's loyalty was genuine or when it wavered. The tension in the room began to rise when the judge noticed a minor procedural error. A lawyer had approached the bench with a stack of papers slightly out of order. Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed, and his lips pressed together in a thin line. At that moment, the Royal Guard, noticing the commotion, made a small comment to clarify the court's procedures. His voice was calm, respectful, and meant to help, but it carried a tone that implied a correction. Judge Harrison's reaction was swift and sharp. He looked at the guard, not with anger exactly, but with a kind of sharp, cutting assessment that made everyone in the room pause. "Is that so?" he said, his voice firm and measured, but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Perhaps you believe yourself an expert in matters far beyond your station. I suggest you remember where you stand and whose court this truly is." The insult landed like a hammer. There was a collective intake of breath from the courtroom audience. Even those who had come prepared for a standard session were caught off guard by the judge's bluntness. Some people exchanged worried glances, unsure whether the situation might escalate. Others leaned in, sensing the dramatic tension that was quickly building. The Royal Guard, however, did not flinch. He remained standing tall, his face calm, his eyes steady. Though insulted, he showed no outward sign of anger or retaliation. He understood that restraint was sometimes the greater display of strength. Judge Harrison, perhaps sensing the weight of his words, continued, his voice firm and uncompromising. "Loyalty and service are admirable, of course," he said, "but wisdom and judgment belong to those trained in the law, not merely in ceremony." His gaze swept across the room, and in that moment it seemed as though every person present felt the tension in their own way. Lawyers straightened their backs, reporters held their pens poised, and the spectators sat rigidly, their attention entirely captured by the exchange. Despite the harsh words, the Royal Guard's reaction was measured. He did not respond verbally. Instead, he simply shifted his stance slightly, a subtle gesture that conveyed acknowledgement without submission. In that single motion, he demonstrated the discipline and poise that had earned him a place in the royal service. The audience, though still murmuring among themselves, could not help but admire the guard's restraint. It was clear that this was a man who understood that appearances mattered, that composure could speak louder than any retort. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavier as Judge Harrison resumed his focus on the case at hand. Papers were shuffled, arguments were made, and witnesses were called. Yet the memory of the brief exchange lingered, as if a storm had passed through the room. Every so often, the judge's eyes flickered toward the guard, a mixture of curiosity and perhaps unspoken challenge evident in his gaze. The guard, in turn, continued to stand with perfect posture, alert but silent, waiting for whatever might come next. As the morning session progressed, small details began to draw attention. The royal guard's silence was not mere compliance, it was a strategic choice. He understood the importance of observation and the value of patience. While the judge's words had been sharp, they were not the final word on the matter. Actions would speak louder, and in the world of royal service, timing and discretion often mattered more than immediate response. At one point, a lawyer attempted to re-engage the judge in a minor procedural debate. Judge Harrison, clearly still processing the earlier moment, shot a piercing glance at the royal guard, almost as if testing his patience and resolve. The guard met the gaze steadily, unshaken, his demeanor perfectly controlled. In that instant, it became apparent to everyone present that a silent understanding had formed. One of respect, perhaps grudging, between two men who, in very different ways, wielded authority in the room. By midday, the case seemed to take on a life of its own. The initial insult had created an undercurrent of tension that subtly influenced every interaction. Witnesses seemed more cautious, lawyers more deliberate in their wording, and even the spectators leaned forward, anticipating the next twist in the courtroom drama. Judge Harrison, for all his experience and authority, could not ignore the presence of the royal guard, whose calm strength seemed to temper the judge's own intensity. As the session drew toward a brief recess, Judge Harrison called for order in the courtroom. "We will pause for a short period," he announced, his voice commanding, "but let us remember that decorum and respect for the law are to be upheld at all times." The words were standard, but the eyes of the judge lingered once more on the royal guard, hinting that the morning's confrontation was far from forgotten. During the recess, whispers filled the room. Spectators speculated quietly about the exchange between the judge and the guard. Some debated whether the judge had overstepped, while others admired the guard's ability to maintain composure in the face of public insult. In corners of the courtroom, the guard spoke quietly with a few colleagues, discussing routine duties, never once addressing the earlier confrontation. His professionalism was unmistakable. He was a man trained to act with dignity, even when the situation was uncomfortable. The morning session had set the stage for what promised to be a day of unexpected developments. The judge's sharp words, the guard's silent response, and the charged atmosphere of the courtroom hinted that events were far from routine. Everyone sensed that the story unfolding before them was not just about a legal dispute. It was also about character, judgment, and the subtle power dynamics that shaped the room. As the guard stood silently near the judge's bench, observing the proceedings with unwavering focus, it became clear that he was a central figure in a drama much larger than anyone had anticipated. Though no one yet knew it, the morning's events would lead to consequences that would surprise everyone in the courtroom, including the judge himself. The royal guard's calm, measured presence had already begun to influence the course of the day, and the tension between insult and restraint would soon play out in ways that no one could predict. By the time the morning session ended, the audience left with a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and suspense. The courtroom had witnessed more than just legal proceedings. It had seen a moment of human confrontation, subtle power, and the quiet strength of a man who knew that dignity could be a far more powerful tool than words. And as Judge Harrison adjourned the session, neither he nor anyone else could have guessed that within mere minutes, the events set in motion that morning would take an astonishing turn, one that would test judgment, loyalty, and courage in ways no one expected. After the courtroom emptied for the short recess, the royal guard remained near the judge's bench, maintaining his posture and calm demeanor. His eyes scanned the room, noting the subtle movements of the spectators and the staff, aware that even the smallest gestures could reveal intentions or emotions. He had long learned that in moments of tension, observation could be as valuable as action. Though he had endured the judge's sharp words earlier, he did not dwell on them. Instead, he focused on his duties, understanding that patience and discretion were the most important qualities in his line of service. Meanwhile, Judge Harrison retired to his chambers, a spacious room lined with towering shelves filled with books and legal documents. The walls were adorned with portraits of past judges and royal officials, their stern expressions a constant reminder of tradition and authority. The judge's mind, however, was far from settled. The brief exchange with the royal guard replayed over and over in his thoughts. He could not ignore the guard's composure, nor the way the man had carried himself in the courtroom. It was rare for someone to withstand such a public reprimand without flinching, and the judge found himself intrigued, even unsettled by it. As the judge pondered the morning's events, an unexpected interruption arrived. A royal officer entered the chambers quietly, carrying an official-looking envelope sealed with the insignia of the crown. Judge Harrison took the envelope, noticing the weight of the document immediately. There was a seriousness in the officer's expression that suggested the matter was urgent. Without hesitation, the judge broke the seal and unfolded the contents. To his surprise, the papers inside contained an official arrest warrant. It was addressed to the royal guard who had stood silently in the courtroom just minutes earlier. The charge was startling. The guard was accused of being involved in a breach of royal protocol, a serious matter that could have severe consequences if proven true. Judge Harrison's brow furrowed as he read the details, and a ripple of tension passed through him. This was no ordinary accusation. It involved security matters at the heart of the royal household, a place where trust, loyalty, and vigilance were paramount. Within moments, the courtroom was alerted, and a small team of officers approached the royal guard. They were careful, professional, and respectful, but the gravity of their mission was clear. "By order of the Crown," one officer announced, "you are to come with us immediately for questioning regarding a breach of protocol." The guard's expression remained calm, almost serene, as he nodded. There was no resistance, no sign of panic, only the quiet readiness of a man who had been trained for unexpected situations. The spectators in the courtroom murmured among themselves. Many were shocked. The same guard who had just stood silently and with dignity under the judge's sharp words was now being escorted away under the weight of an arrest warrant. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every detail of the unfolding drama. Lawyers whispered speculations to each other, their curiosity piqued. The courtroom that had moments ago been tense with verbal confrontation now felt charged with suspense and anticipation. As the royal guard was led out, he maintained his composure, keeping his head high and his steps measured. The officers guided him with care, respecting his position and service. There was no fear in his eyes, only a focused determination to face the situation with integrity. Even as he was taken away, he remained silent, refusing to speculate or argue. His calmness only deepened the curiosity and respect of those who watched him leave. Judge Harrison remained in his chambers, feeling a mixture of surprise and concern. He knew that the accusations against the guard could be serious, but he also sensed that there was more to the story than what appeared on paper. There was a subtlety in the situation that demanded careful thought and discernment. He decided that he would follow the investigation closely, not only as a judge of the law, but also as someone interested in understanding the truth behind the unfolding events. The royal guard was escorted to a secure room prepared for questioning. It was a small, simple space, designed for clarity and focus rather than intimidation. Officers waited outside, standing silently as the guard entered. He observed the room, noting the details and confirming that everything was in order, before sitting calmly at a sturdy wooden table. The investigators began their questioning carefully, outlining the charges and asking for the guard's account of recent events. Despite the seriousness of the situation, the guard responded with clarity and honesty. He explained his recent actions, providing precise details of his duties and movements. He spoke with a tone of quiet authority, demonstrating both knowledge and loyalty. Every answer was thoughtful, measured, and true. The investigators listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances, realizing that the situation was more complicated than they had initially assumed. Outside the room, the atmosphere was tense. News of the arrest had spread quickly, reaching other members of the royal service and officials within the city. Rumors began to circulate, some questioning the guard's loyalty, others defending his character. Amid the uncertainty, one thing became clear. This was no ordinary incident. The Royal Guard's reputation for discipline and integrity was well known, and many believed that if there were wrongdoing, it would have been subtle and difficult to detect. As the investigation continued, Judge Harrison observed the proceedings from a careful distance. He reviewed the case documents, examined protocols, and consulted with colleagues. With each passing moment, he became increasingly convinced that appearances might be deceiving. The guard's actions, initially interpreted as a breach, could have been part of a larger, unseen effort to protect the crown and maintain security. This thought intrigued him. He realized that in his earlier judgment, his quick insult in the courtroom, he may have underestimated the guard's wisdom and judgment. In the meantime, the Royal Guard remained calm, answering every question patiently. He did not express anger, frustration, or fear. Instead, he demonstrated a disciplined approach, one that revealed both professionalism and intelligence. The investigators, initially expecting defensiveness or confusion, were impressed by his composure. It became increasingly difficult for them to believe that the guard was guilty of intentional wrongdoing. Each answer he provided strengthened the impression that he had acted with purpose and integrity, even if his actions were misunderstood. As the afternoon wore on, the investigators began to piece together the timeline and details of the incident. They reviewed records, security protocols, and communications, seeking to understand how the situation had unfolded. Slowly, a new perspective began to emerge. It appeared that the guard's seemingly suspicious actions had actually prevented a minor but potentially serious lapse in royal security. His presence, vigilance, and strategic decisions had ensured that the royal household remained safe. What had been interpreted as a breach now appeared as a calculated act of loyalty and service. When this revelation reached Judge Harrison, he felt a mixture of relief and admiration. The earlier insult he had directed at the guard now seemed misplaced, the product of a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a reflection of the guard's true character. He realized that the man's silence in the courtroom had not been weakness but wisdom, a deliberate choice to maintain dignity and authority in a situation charged with tension. The investigators, having confirmed the guard's actions were honorable and protective, prepared to release him. Officers returned to escort him back, but the Royal Guard remained calm and composed, accepting the outcome with quiet professionalism. As he returned to the courtroom, he met the eyes of Judge Harrison. There was no anger, no resentment, only a steady gaze that conveyed understanding, respect, and an unspoken lesson in patience and judgment. Judge Harrison, witnessing the guard's return, reflected on the events of the day. He realized that his own perception had been incomplete, influenced by surface appearances rather than deeper understanding. The Royal Guard's actions had demonstrated loyalty, intelligence, and courage, qualities that could not be measured by words alone. The judge's respect for the man grew, tempered by a humbling recognition of his own earlier error in judgment. The spectators, returning after the brief recess, were struck by the turn of events. The courtroom, once tense and uncertain, now held an atmosphere of quiet admiration. Many whispered among themselves, acknowledging the Royal Guard's poise and professionalism. Lawyers and reporters, too, recognized the subtle strength required to endure such a situation with dignity. The incident became a powerful lesson in the value of observation, patience, and careful judgment. By the time the afternoon session began, the narrative of the day had shifted. What started as an insult in the courtroom had transformed into a story of loyalty, courage, and integrity. Judge Harrison and the Royal Guard now shared a silent, mutual understanding, an acknowledgement that true strength often lay in quiet composure, strategic patience, and steadfast duty. The courtroom, having witnessed this extraordinary moment, carried with it a sense of respect for both law and service, leaving everyone present with a memorable and instructive experience. Even as proceedings resumed, the lesson of the day lingered in the minds of those present. Judge Harrison, once quick to insult, now approached the session with renewed attentiveness and a careful eye. The Royal Guard, steadfast and dignified, resumed his post, aware that service sometimes required enduring temporary misunderstandings while remaining true to one's principles. Together, they had demonstrated that courage and judgment were not always measured in words or actions alone, but in the silent strength that guided each decision. The events of that day would not be forgotten quickly. For the judge, it became a lesson in humility and discernment. For the royal guard, it was another confirmation that loyalty, discipline, and calm judgment could weather even the most unexpected challenges. And for the spectators, it was a vivid reminder that appearances could be misleading, and that true character often revealed itself only under pressure, when words were few and actions spoke volumes. Even after the royal guard was cleared of wrongdoing, the tension in the courtroom did not immediately vanish. Though he had returned to his post, his mind was focused, vigilant, and aware that the events of the morning had shifted the balance of attention in subtle ways. Everyone in the room now seemed to watch him with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Whispers traveled through the spectators, speculating about the guard's role in the security breach that never truly happened. Lawyers and reporters took extra notes, eager to document what had become a story of unexpected courage, composure, and loyalty. Judge Harrison, for his part, remained seated at the bench, quietly reflecting on the unfolding events. He had spent the afternoon reviewing reports, cross-checking facts, and considering the testimony of the officers who had escorted the guard for questioning. The judge understood now that the royal guard's actions had been deliberate, cautious, and entirely in service of the crown. The man had acted not out of fear or impulse, but with careful calculation to protect the kingdom's interests. However, while the immediate threat had been resolved, a new complexity emerged. During the investigation, subtle clues had surfaced, suggesting that the apparent breach of protocol had been part of a larger, more complex situation. Documents hinted at unusual activity within certain areas of the royal estate. Surveillance records, initially overlooked, showed a pattern that was irregular but not directly threatening. Communications between various staff members revealed a need for careful coordination and alertness. Slowly, a picture began to form that suggested someone or something had been testing the loyalty and vigilance of the royal guard. The realization prompted Judge Harrison to take a more active interest in the guard's duties. He requested additional briefings from the royal security team, wanting to understand exactly what had occurred before and after the incident. The more he learned, the more he recognized that the guard's actions had prevented what could have been a far more serious problem. Each detail reinforced the notion that appearances could be deceiving. What seemed like a breach had, in fact, been an extraordinary act of vigilance, requiring intuition, courage, and deep knowledge of protocol. The royal guard, meanwhile, resumed his regular duties with quiet efficiency. He interacted with colleagues respectfully, but remained fully aware that the events of the morning had not gone unnoticed. His training emphasized observation, patience, and the careful assessment of situations, and he applied these principles as he monitored the courtroom and its occupants. Though the judge had insulted him earlier, he did not harbor resentment. He understood that human reactions, even from someone as intelligent as Judge Harrison, could be influenced by stress, assumptions, or incomplete information. As the day progressed, it became clear that the royal guard's actions were earning him new recognition, not just from the judge, but from the entire staff and spectators present in the courtroom. Observers noted the subtle ways in which his behavior had influenced the courtroom's atmosphere. His calm, disciplined presence had a stabilizing effect, reducing tension and encouraging thoughtful behavior among those who had been anxious or reactive. The guard's example demonstrated that leadership and courage often manifested quietly, without fanfare, and that respect was earned through consistent integrity rather than dramatic displays. Judge Harrison, intrigued by the developments, began to piece together the broader implications. He reviewed additional records, examining the guard's actions step by step. Each move, each decision, revealed careful planning and awareness. The guard had anticipated potential issues, mitigated risks, and ensured that no harm came to the royal family or the integrity of the court. It was becoming increasingly evident that the man's loyalty was exceptional, his judgment flawless under pressure. The judge could not help but reflect on his own behavior earlier that morning. His insult, though harsh and publicly delivered, had been based on an incomplete understanding of the situation. He realized that his words had been premature, formed without full consideration of the guard's responsibilities and the complexity of his role. The more he analyzed the events, the more he appreciated the depth of skill, discipline, and intelligence required to perform such duties successfully. In the following hours, additional members of the royal security team were called in to provide their accounts. They described how the guard had noticed subtle irregularities that others had missed: an unlocked gate left unnoticed, an unusual visitor lingering near restricted areas, a communication that had been intercepted and quietly addressed. Each account emphasized that the guard's vigilance had prevented a situation that could have escalated into a serious security concern. His actions had been measured, precise, and entirely appropriate for someone entrusted with the protection of the crown. As the details emerged, Judge Harrison began to see the situation from a new perspective. He recognized that the royal guard's calm demeanor during the courtroom insult had been a conscious demonstration of strength. Rather than reacting emotionally or defensively, the guard had maintained composure, demonstrating a deeper understanding of authority, protocol, and strategy. The judge realized that the man's silence was not submission, but an exercise of wisdom, an understanding that patience and careful observation could achieve far more than immediate confrontation. The investigation, now fully underway, revealed additional layers of intrigue. Security logs indicated that certain individuals had been testing the protocols of the royal estate, attempting minor disruptions to gauge the alertness of staff. Though these actions were not overtly dangerous, they required careful attention and a quick response to prevent escalation. The royal guard had been at the center of these protective measures, ensuring that any potential threat was contained quietly and efficiently. Judge Harrison, observing the unfolding events, was impressed by the guard's foresight. He began to reconsider his initial assumptions, recognizing that true competence often required subtlety, patience, and discretion. The man's ability to navigate the complexities of security without causing alarm or drawing attention to himself demonstrated not only skill, but also a profound sense of responsibility. Each decision made by the guard reflected an understanding of consequences, the importance of timing, and the need for careful judgment. The courtroom, too, responded to the new revelations. Spectators who had been anxious or skeptical began to see the guard in a new light. His measured approach, which had once seemed passive, was now understood as deliberate and strategic. Lawyers who had been tense and argumentative grew more respectful, acknowledging the presence of someone whose actions spoke louder than words. Reporters noted the remarkable transformation of perception, realizing that the story was evolving into a lesson on integrity, courage, and wisdom under pressure. Meanwhile, the royal guard continued to carry out his duties, aware that the investigation was not yet fully concluded. He remained vigilant, attentive to every detail, and careful not to draw unnecessary attention to himself. His professionalism and dedication became even more evident as he balanced the demands of his responsibilities with the scrutiny of the ongoing investigation. Each decision, each action, reinforced the impression that he was a man of exceptional discipline and loyalty. Judge Harrison, growing increasingly thoughtful, began to reflect on the nature of judgment itself. He recognized that his initial insult had been a result of incomplete information and a momentary lapse in perception. True understanding, he realized, required observation, patience, and the willingness to reassess assumptions in light of new evidence. The royal guard, through his composure and steadfast duty, had demonstrated qualities that were both admirable and instructive, a living example of integrity under scrutiny. By late afternoon, the investigation had revealed enough to conclude that the royal guard had acted entirely appropriately. His earlier actions, once misinterpreted, were now clearly understood as deliberate, loyal, and protective measures. Officers documented their findings, confirming that the guard had prevented potential complications without drawing unnecessary attention or causing disruption. The situation, once tense and uncertain, had been resolved with clarity, reinforcing the guard's reputation for skill, composure, and courage. When the guard returned to the courtroom once more, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Spectators, lawyers, and court staff recognized the significance of his actions. The royal guard, standing quietly at his post, embodied professionalism and integrity, a reminder that true strength often lies in patience, observation, and careful decision-making. Judge Harrison, observing him closely, felt a mixture of respect and humility, aware that the man had taught an unspoken but powerful lesson in judgment, loyalty, and courage. As the day drew to a close, Judge Harrison called for a brief address to acknowledge the events that had transpired. He spoke carefully, emphasizing the importance of loyalty, vigilance, and professional conduct. Though he did not dwell on his own earlier words, there was a subtle acknowledgement in his tone that the Royal Guard's actions had demonstrated exceptional skill and judgment. The courtroom listened intently, understanding that the morning's drama had transformed into a lesson in integrity, patience, and quiet strength. The Royal Guard, receiving the acknowledgement with quiet humility, remained calm and composed. He understood that his duty was not to seek recognition, but to perform his role with diligence, skill, and unwavering commitment. The judge's acknowledgement, though meaningful, was secondary to the satisfaction of knowing that his actions had successfully protected the crown and upheld the principles of security and loyalty. By the end of the day, the story of the Guard's calm endurance, strategic foresight, and measured response had become the focus of attention. Spectators, lawyers, and staff left the courtroom with a sense of admiration, inspired by the display of courage, discipline, and wisdom under pressure. Judge Harrison, reflecting on the events, resolved to approach future situations with greater patience and understanding, recognizing that appearances can be misleading and that true strength is often revealed quietly under scrutiny and in moments of challenge. The Royal Guard, meanwhile, returned to his duties with renewed focus and dignity. He had faced scrutiny, misunderstanding, and investigation, yet his composure, intelligence, and loyalty had remained unshaken. The events of the day would remain a defining moment in his career, a demonstration of the power of calm judgment, strategic action, and unwavering dedication. Through his actions, he had not only protected the crown, but also taught a lasting lesson to all who had witnessed the unfolding drama. The following morning, the courtroom was filled with an unusual sense of anticipation. Word of the Royal Guard's composure and actions had spread throughout the city, drawing spectators who were curious to witness the man who had quietly managed a potential crisis while maintaining absolute dignity. Journalists were present in greater numbers, their notebooks ready, their cameras poised to capture every moment. Lawyers, court staff, and even the judge's clerk seemed more alert, aware that this session could become a defining moment in the history of the court. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom with a measured pace, his eyes scanning the room. He had spent the night reviewing every detail of the previous day's events, reflecting on the Royal Guard's actions and on his own earlier behavior. There was a subtle change in the judge's demeanor, a quiet acknowledgement of humility mixed with curiosity. He understood that the Guard's display of calm judgment and strategic awareness deserved more than private reflection. It warranted public recognition. The Royal Guard stood at his post near the judge's bench, his posture impeccable as always. Yet today, there was a subtle difference in the way he carried himself. He was aware of the eyes upon him, but he remained composed, neither intimidated by attention nor seeking it. His presence exuded quiet authority, a reminder that true strength often lay not in words, but in the disciplined control of one's actions and the careful execution of responsibilities. The morning session began, and the proceedings initially followed the usual routine. Lawyers presented their arguments, witnesses testified, and the judge listened with attentiveness. However, beneath the surface, an unspoken tension lingered. Everyone in the room sensed that the events of the previous day had created a deeper understanding between the judge and the Royal Guard, a connection forged through observation, patience, and unexpected challenges. Judge Harrison, when he finally spoke, addressed the courtroom with a tone that was both formal and thoughtful. "Yesterday," he began, "we witnessed an incident that tested not only the procedures of this court, but also the judgment and integrity of those present. In moments of pressure, it is easy to make assumptions, to react hastily, and to misinterpret actions." His eyes shifted toward the Royal Guard, who met the gaze without flinching, standing tall and composed. The courtroom grew silent as the judge continued. "We must recognize that appearances can be deceiving, and that true loyalty and courage are often revealed through careful observation, patience, and deliberate action. The royal guard, through his composure, judgment, and unwavering dedication, has demonstrated the highest standards of service to the crown and to the principles of security and order. There was a collective murmur of admiration from the spectators. Lawyers, staff, and visitors acknowledged the truth in the judge's words. The royal guard's actions, once misunderstood as a potential breach of protocol, were now fully recognized as a remarkable display of loyalty, intelligence, and courage. Even the most skeptical observers could not deny the significance of what had transpired. Judge Harrison's tone softened slightly as he added, "It is a reminder to us all that judgment must be tempered with patience, and that understanding often requires careful attention to detail and the willingness to look beyond first impressions. Let this serve as a lesson to all who participate in the affairs of this court and to all who serve the crown." The royal guard acknowledged the judge's words with a subtle nod, maintaining his posture and composure. There was no prideful display, no boastful reaction, only the quiet satisfaction of a man who had fulfilled his duties with integrity and professionalism. His actions had not been motivated by recognition, but by a deep sense of responsibility and loyalty, a principle that guided every decision he made. As the session continued, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. The tension of the previous day had transformed into a sense of respect and admiration. Lawyers conducted their arguments with renewed focus, understanding that the events unfolding were more than legal procedures. They were lessons in character, judgment, and human strength. Witnesses testified with care, aware that the eyes of the court were now more attuned to integrity and composure than to simple technicalities. Outside the courtroom, the story of the royal guard spread quickly. Citizens who had heard of the incident praised his dedication and calmness, sharing accounts of his actions with family, friends, and colleagues. Social gatherings and marketplaces buzzed with discussion of the guard who had faced accusation, maintained dignity under insult, and emerged as a symbol of loyalty and courage. His reputation, once confined to the royal service, had now become a subject of public admiration. Within the courtroom, Judge Harrison continued to reflect on the lessons of the previous day. He recognized that his earlier insult, though unintentional in its harm, had been an opportunity for both men to demonstrate character. The guard had responded with calm restraint, while the judge had taken the time to reassess, understand, and ultimately acknowledge the truth. It was a rare moment of mutual recognition, where both authority and service were balanced through observation, respect, and integrity. As the day progressed, the judge decided to address a crucial aspect of the investigation that had emerged. "It has become clear," he said, "that the events which appeared as a breach of protocol were, in fact, preventive measures executed with skill and discretion. The Royal Guard's actions ensured the safety and security of the crown without causing disruption or alarm. Such conduct exemplifies the highest standard of service and loyalty." The courtroom responded with a mixture of applause and quiet acknowledgement. Spectators and court staff recognized that what they had witnessed was more than a procedural incident. It was an example of courage, integrity, and intelligence under pressure. The Royal Guard remained composed, allowing the acknowledgement to speak for itself rather than seeking personal recognition. His actions, measured and thoughtful, had already made a lasting impression. Judge Harrison continued, elaborating on the significance of the events. "Let this day remind us that leadership and judgment are not always demonstrated through words or public recognition. True strength often lies in observation, patience, and the quiet execution of responsibilities. The Royal Guard has provided an example for us all, showing that integrity, vigilance, and loyalty are virtues that withstand scrutiny and challenge alike." The Royal Guard, standing at his post, felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. His duty had always been to serve the crown with discipline and care, and today, that service had been acknowledged in a way that reinforced the value of his role. He understood that recognition was secondary to responsibility, yet he appreciated that his actions could inspire others and demonstrate the importance of courage and composure in moments of uncertainty. Throughout the day, the courtroom continued with the normal proceedings, but the energy had shifted. Lawyers approached their work with renewed diligence, witnesses spoke with measured attention, and spectators observed with greater awareness. The presence of the Royal Guard and the lessons of the previous day had created an environment where respect, integrity, and careful judgment were at the forefront. Judge Harrison, observing the guard, felt a renewed sense of purpose as a judge. He realized that his role was not only to interpret and enforce the law, but also to recognize and cultivate the virtues of those who served the crown and the community. The morning's events had transformed a moment of misunderstanding into an opportunity for education, reflection, and mutual respect. By late afternoon, the session was drawing to a close. Judge Harrison addressed the courtroom one final time, emphasizing the broader significance of the events. We have learned today that every individual's actions carry weight and consequence. Understanding, patience, and discernment are essential in all matters, whether legal, social, or personal. The Royal Guard's conduct serves as a reminder that true loyalty and courage are expressed through calm, deliberate, and thoughtful action. The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the words settling on every listener. Spectators, lawyers, and staff reflected on the significance of the day. The Royal Guard's example had transcended the immediate incident, leaving a lasting impression that extended beyond the walls of the court. His dedication and composure were a model for all who witnessed them, demonstrating that integrity and vigilance were virtues that could withstand scrutiny and challenge alike. Judge Harrison, finally rising from his bench, approached the Royal Guard with a measured step. He extended a hand in acknowledgement, a gesture that spoke volumes. Your actions yesterday and today have exemplified the highest standards of loyalty and service. It is an honor to witness such dedication and integrity. The Royal Guard accepted the gesture with quiet dignity. There was no prideful display, no excessive acknowledgement, only a simple nod and a calm, respectful expression. The handshake between the two men symbolized more than mere recognition. It represented a mutual understanding, a shared respect forged through challenge, observation, and integrity. As the courtroom emptied, the Royal Guard returned to his duties with renewed focus. He moved with the same disciplined precision as always, aware that his responsibilities were ongoing and that vigilance could never be relaxed. Yet he carried with him a sense of quiet fulfillment, knowing that his actions had been understood, respected, and had left a lasting impact. Judge Harrison, reflecting on the day's events, recognized that this experience had been transformative. He had learned the value of patience, careful observation, and the importance of withholding judgment until all facts were known. The Royal Guard had taught a lesson in courage, composure, and integrity, qualities that were often tested in moments of challenge and uncertainty. Outside the courtroom, news of the event spread quickly. The story of the Royal Guard who had faced accusation, endured insult, and demonstrated exceptional loyalty and judgment captivated the public. Citizens praised his dedication, while colleagues in the royal service recognized the significance of his actions. The Guard's reputation was firmly established as one of courage, integrity, and professionalism. By the end of the day, the courtroom and its occupants had undergone a subtle but profound transformation. What had begun as a moment of tension and misunderstanding had become a story of courage, wisdom, and respect. Judge Harrison and the Royal Guard had both learned valuable lessons about judgment, restraint, and the power of quiet strength. The day's events would be remembered not only for the courtroom drama, but also for the enduring lesson in integrity, loyalty, and human character. In the quiet that followed the conclusion of the session, the Royal Guard returned to his post one final time. Standing tall and composed, he reflected on the events with calm satisfaction. He had faced misunderstanding, scrutiny, and potential accusation, yet his actions had remained consistent, disciplined, and loyal. His example served as a testament to the power of patience, observation, and careful judgment, a legacy that would inspire others long after the courtroom had emptied and the day had ended.